We'll be looking today at changing the petrol filter on this Ford. This is my Mark III Mondeo, but the general fuel filter setup is common to a lot of Fords, so it may well apply to yours, regardless of the model, give or take a few details. So the filter here is located under the car, next to the fuel tank on the right-hand side. You can see it tucked up here. The first thing you'll require, obviously, is a new filter. So find which one you need. Usually the best way is to find the Ford part number and then cross-reference that against the OEM manufacturers. Here I have the Mahler version, KL409. Other brands are fine too, of course. Just maybe avoid generic, unbranded, cheap rubbish. It's not expensive to get the good quality brands, and obviously your car's fuel supply is a critical system. You'll need access under the car. Here I've jacked up the rear, as you can see. Once you've done this job once, you could probably do it the next time without lifting the car. But it would be trickier, as you need to find the bracket bolts and also see the fuel line clips. So I suggest getting out the jack. Then before you do anything else with the filter itself, go get in the engine bay. And you want to track down the fuse or relay for the fuel pump. So find a fuse box diagram and look up the right one. In the case of this Mondeo, the pump has a relay, which is this one second from the top. I'm just going to remove that to disable the fuel pump, and then go crank the engine. And the engine may start, in which case let it run until it stalls, which should only take a few seconds. Or as you can see in this case, it just cranks over and won't fire at all. So I'm doing this to remove extant fuel pressure in the fuel line from the pump onward, so that we don't lose a bunch of petrol and make a mess when we disconnect the lines. So with that done, we can actually remove the filter. Now I suggest some paper or a floor towel to deal with any spilt petrol. And you'll also need a catch tray for draining the petrol that's still in the filter and the lines. On the topic of which, you should be wearing latex gloves and also some eye protection to deal with splashes. I'm not wearing any here, which is mea culpa, but really you should. Okay, so there are two clips on the lines to be released before the lines will come off, one on each end. Some filters have three, the third being the return line. But in this case, that junction, so to say, is external to the filter, so there are only two. The clips are the yellow bits that you can see here, and they need to be pushed up and off the filter nozzles. If they're stiff, you can try a tool on them, like this. But if they're clean enough, you can usually just push them out with your fingers, like that. And once the clip is released, you can pull off the line, wiggle it off, being careful not to damage the plastic. And as you get it off the end, you'll start to get petrol leaking, so make sure that your catch tray is positioned correctly underneath. And again, I should be wearing gloves. So position the one line out of the way, and then do the other, or others. I should also say, for the record, the most obvious safety thing when it comes to petrol, which is to keep any flame away, so you shouldn't be smoking a cigarette while you're doing this. Alright, when you've got both lines off the filter will drain itself, so just let it do so, and then we need to get it off the car. So the way this design works is the filter is held by a bracket which is bolted to the car's floor pan. It's very simple. You just need an 8mm hex socket and a ratchet with a short extension bar. There are just two bolts. Here's the first. And then the second is up here. And once you've got both bolts out, the filter will fall away from the car. Just make sure that it clears the lines without damaging them. And also be aware that it will continue to drain the remaining petrol in it as you tilt it. So point the out end downward and let it drain into your catch tray. Right, so now we need to replace the filter in the bracket. It's clamped in with this retaining bolt. Which for some reason is a 7mm hex head here, not 8, so you need a different size socket. So undo that, take it out, and the clamp will release. Watch your fingers as the spring effect is quite strong. Finally, make a careful note of which way round the filter goes. Here the in end is toward the outside and the out end is toward this stop on the bracket. There are also usually arrows on both the bracket and the filter that you can align, but you do need to get it right, so take care. And then take the new filter and get it into position. Now, I tried here to clamp the bracket back together using vice grips, as you can see, but I couldn't get the retaining bolt holes to line up with each other properly, as the clamp needs to move on the filter surface as it comes back around together, and of course it doesn't. Conversely, you can't get the bolt even started with the filter already in position, as the holes are too misaligned at that point, so it's a pretty awkward thing to do. What I did in the end was I got some dishwash detergent to use as a lubricant, and I lined the interior surfaces of the bracket clamp with that. And then I got the bolt started in its thread, but only just, so that the clamp was maximally open, so to say. And then that was just sufficient for the filter to be slid in with some force. And once again, make sure that the filter's the correct way around, and then that retaining bolt can be done up, tightened, and the clamp tightened. Then, as I like to say, reinstallation is just the reversal of removal. Put the filter and the bracket back in place and get the bolts back in and tighten them up. And then the fuel lines go back on just with a push on each end, and the yellow clips also just push back onto the nozzles by hand. Finally, get some absorbent paper towel or something and clean up any spilt petrol around the lines. And then we're almost done. The last thing is to just replace that fuel pump relay or fuse that we removed earlier. And we're going to prime the fuel system by turning the ignition on but not starting the engine, just for a few seconds. This runs the fuel pump and builds up fuel pressure before we actually try to get ignition. So do it twice maybe, and then you can try starting the engine. Don't worry if it stalls like this, just try again and it should be good. Then with the engine idling, have another look under the car with a good light and just check that your lines are not leaking. This looks good. So, lower the car, and that's it. Last thing to say is to safely dispose of that spilt petrol. It's not worth trying to reuse it. So you can just take it to a disposal bin, for example, at some auto stores. Okay, hope that was helpful.